Good morning. Welcome, everybody. Welcome, dads. It's good to see a couple of you guys out here. The speaker today is somebody I've known for 30 years. He came to Sweden in 1980 and came and picked me up, and we got married and have been married for 25 years. He is not a professional public speaker. He's a mortgage lender, so I just want you to know that I'm very, very proud that he's going to be talking today because he is, even though not a public speaker, a wonderful dad and husband and family leader. And so I would love for you to welcome my husband, Dave Moore.
Can you hear me okay? As you will have very quickly found out, I am not a public speaker, but I appreciate Liz introducing me thus. Thank you so much for having me here. I really appreciate the opportunity to meet all of you. MOPS was a pretty big factor in our lives, and I'll describe that here in a minute. But, this is a nice opportunity to kind of give a little bit of testimony of what it's been like growing up in the Marr household, what our adventure has been. It really started in 1989 when Daniel was born. He was, like all firstborns, just the focus of our life, and we poured everything that we had into loving him and growing him up. And then an incident occurred that became, as your notes will say, the realization that I was in a little bit over my head. It was about this time of year, and Daniel was not quite 2, and Liz was pregnant with Michelle, and so Daniel's now 21, which is just, a blink ago, really. And Michelle was about to be born in January, so we had a little bit of time, and we wanted to move him out of the crib and into his big boy bed. And so, hey, this is a big thing. It's great. You're growing up. This is wonderful. So we put him to bed in his big boy bed. And there's no crib. So, he gets out of bed. No. You want to stay in bed. But that's not what he wanted to do. So, Dano, you got to stay in bed. And, we put him back to bed. And sure enough, in a few minutes, out he comes. Maybe you guys haven't experienced this, but this was our experience. And so we put him back to bed, and it's like, okay, buddy, you got to stay in bed. Stay in bed. Not his deal, because it's a little darker, it's a little unfamiliar, and he's not happy. And so he comes out again. I said, okay, this is it. You have to stay in bed, or I'm going to give you a spanking. And he's like, what does that mean? I have no idea what you're talking about. So we put him back to bed, and out he comes, but he knows, he's understanding now that I'm serious in some way, shape, or form. I mean what I say, and he's coming out crying, pick me up, Daddy. This is, what is going on? And it's like, okay, I said it. I now have to give him a spanking for what? For what purpose? I had to give him a spanking because he wanted his mommy and daddy, and he was afraid. So there I am, okay, bam, and off to bed, and he stayed in bed. Oh my God, I felt like crap. I felt horrible. Here my son was looking to me to give him love and comfort, and what did I do? I didn't, say, okay, this is the way you parent. What I did was I pulled up from my childhood what you do. So I was kind of channeling my dad. When I grew up, my dad was in the military, and we literally saluted and we marched off to bed. My 2 sisters and I, and that's what we did. And that's once we were in bed, that was it. You were in bed upon pain of death, we thought. So here I was, trying to figure out what it was that I needed to do, and parenting just became a lot more complicated. And I got that. Now, at this time, a good buddy of mine, Brad Nixon, in fact, Brad's wife, Karen Nixon, introduced Liz to MOPS. And from MOPS, we then met, all of our friends. Sharon Fast, whom you know, and the Nixons, and all of our group of friends came from MOPS and have been our friends for 20 years. Well, Brad introduced me to a seminar here at the church and said, why don't you come and join me at this thing called Dad the Family Shepherd? And it's just, it hit me at that moment, I need this. I need something that has to do with parenting. And so I, even though it was a, big ticket, it was $50, 2 days, Dad the Family Shepherd, I was committed. So I remember almost nothing from that seminar, except for one thing. And I wrote it down here for you. When the student is ready, the teacher appears. This is a theme that comes up in your life all the time. But sins of the father. Have you guys heard that expression before? Sins of the father. Well, the first part of it is what it is, but down here it says, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children and on the grandchildren to the third and the fourth generations. So the reason I captured this because I just experienced this. I knew this to be true. I got what this meant. You see, as I was looking at, this moment in time, I was sort of looking at my dad and saying, Dad, this is the culture from which I came, was this harsh disciplinarian kind of environment. And it's like, is that really what I want to do? Every time that my kid does something and I don't know exactly what to do, I'm just going to pull from my childhood and lay it down on my child? I looked at my dad's history, and, he was born in 1931, and so, he grew up in the Depression. His father was a bread truck driver and a farmer. He was an alcoholic. He beat his wife. That was my granddad. And in fact, I was visiting one summer when he hit my grandmother. Wow, okay, there's a nice family heritage. So I remember when my dad, I was around 13, and my dad said, Dave, you can yell, you can scream, you can throw stuff, but never, ever, ever hit your wife. Okay. I hadn't really thought about it one way or the other, but that was his thing. That was his stake in the ground. He was saying, you know what, by God, no matter how frustrated I get, one line I will not cross is I will not hit my wife. And that was his takeaway from his childhood, at least the one that he shared with me at the time. And it's like, okay, here I am married, and now I clearly am not going to hit my wife, but there's some things that my dad didn't say. And I, of course, experienced a lot of the things. You see, his dad was an alcoholic, and my dad was a pretty heavy drinker. He wouldn't hit, my grandfather hit his wife, my dad wouldn't hit his, but I wasn't so lucky. He didn't beat me, but he hit me enough to where I was intimidated. And so that's the kind of childhood that I had. Now don't get me wrong. This is not a Dave bashing his father talk. This is just describing. I love my dad. I love him to this day. I miss him terribly. But he was who he was. And so here I am, with my son, and I'm spanking him at the first real parenting moment that I have. It's just like, is this really the kind of family culture that I want to develop here? And clearly the answer is no, I don't. I don't want to pull out of default who my dad was and then make that my style. Instead, I want to design my own family culture that then doesn't have the sins of the father lasting for 3 and 4 generations, but the blessings of the father. Because, you see, that's really the thing. You've heard the expression, the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree. That's what that's all about. How many pieces of information do your children, accumulate before they're even aware they're alive? Billions? Billions of pieces of information tamped down into their little psyche long before they even know who they are, consciously, intellectually. And so they then are going to become who you are. Whoever you are, that's who they are going to become as their starting point. And then they get to put a stake in the ground and say, just like I did, my dad was frustrated. That was his thing. It's not that he, with his frustrations, wouldn't beat his wife. It's that he was frustrated at all. He didn't know. I mean, he didn't have any information. He didn't have a MOPS group that he was introduced to, and then from that they could then develop a family culture intellectually and understand as an adult, here's how we're going to do it. We're going to separate the bad, we're going to keep the good, and then we're going to create our own family culture. So that's really what I wanted to talk about today, is creating your own family culture. And so at this sort of realization of I love my dad, I love my mom, I loved my childhood, but it was a far cry from what I thought was going to be the way I wanted to go. So the stake in the ground that I wanted to plant was I didn't want to be frustrated. I wanted to be positive. I wanted to be loving. I wanted to be expansive so that the kids could they wouldn't have to fear of getting out of bed to go to the bathroom like I did. So we set out. Now, of course, now I'm talking in retrospect, the last 20 years, I'm sort of thinking back as to, what are the sequence of events that have influenced my life? And the sequence had started really with this church. And this church created a MOPS group. And this MOPS group then sent out people like Karen Nixon that introduced my wife, and then we formed a cell group from that. And that cell group then became the foundation where I was able to grow up as a father, as a husband. I mean, those, are a key part of who I am. As I'm looking back in my life, I go, you know what? I'm a good husband. I'm a good husband, and I'm a good father. Why? Because it started early on where I said I wasn't going to live by default. I was going to live by design.